Let's talk about the unavoidable logic of God's existence.
It is not logical.
Hello everyone, I'm Professor Plink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Today we're going to be taking a look at a channel called Apologetics Unchained, who has a video calling out the 3 fatal flaws of atheism that he's going to expose by the use of logic. You know, the entire idea behind religious apologetics is that it's supposed to be focused on advocating for their belief in God and their specific religious conviction. After all, when it comes to the Christian apologetic side of things, like the fellow in this video is, their own holy book says in Peter 3:15, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." But so very often, Christian apologists seem to dodge promoting their faith altogether and just go on the offensive. But it's never against Jewish beliefs or Muslim beliefs or Hindus or Buddhists. No, more often than not, when the Christians are on the offensive, they take aim straight at us atheists. You know, the people who don't even have any religious conviction and don't want any. And also the hardest group of people to try to rhetorically attack their belief system because we're the only ones who don't have a unifying belief system in the first place. I mean, we don't have anything to defend because we don't make any specific claims. Oh, sure, some atheists will make the positive claim that no God exists and that they are sure of it, but even that is a claim that doesn't really need defending beyond believing that every God claim that they've been presented with is false. So even that claim just leads back to the theistic claim that the apologist is attempting to advocate for and having to try to convince the atheist of it in order to stymie their insistence that God doesn't exist. But most atheists tend to fall into the agnostic atheist category and are simply in a position of not being convinced of any theistic claim, and thus not a believer in any God. So any way you slice it, it's folly to go on the attack and attempt to target a belief system that doesn't even exist. This is why when apologists do so, they tend to make up a belief system that they will then insist that all atheists subscribe to, like nihilism or materialism, and then get mad when you tell them that there's no prerequisite belief that atheists have to hold to. Now, I get the knee-jerk desire to do this. After all, atheism is constantly attempting to debunk religious apologists and malign their beliefs, so it's natural to want to attempt a little turnabout as fair play. But it's not my fault that you've committed yourself to what is probably the most massive, impactful claim about the nature of existence itself that is also probably the most poorly substantiated and unfalsifiable in its conception, and so easy to put the screws to. And it's also not my fault that atheists have no such attackable position to permit you to drop a philosophical uno reversi. It's the nature of our two positions. Yours is attackable and needs substantiation. Mine doesn't, beyond you and all other apologists failing to meet your burden of proof. But none of that has ever stopped apologists from going on the warpath against non-believers, and that's what we have today. So let's take a gander at this attempt to debunk atheism using, logical reasoning. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon, Twitter, and Blue Sky, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm, which practices prudent, powerful perspectives and provides a practical path, pushing past pious precepts, pursuing provable principles, and paving a progressive paradigm, while propelling us past pious, parochial postulations. May keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
Let's talk about the unavoidable logic of God's existence, using what most of us likely have in common. So let's start with what most people, whether believer or skeptic, already accept. The first one is that the universe exists. The second one is that logic is real. so like 2 plus 2 equals 4 universally, it's not just an opinion. And 3, some moral values, such as murder, for instance, seem objectively wrong.
Well, I can give you the first two, although those first two do run into the problem of hard solipsism, which is the ideology that only one's own mind is sure to exist. Solipsists contend that knowledge of anything outside one's own mind is unsure, hence there's no such thing as objective truth, and nothing about the external world and its workings can actually be known. I can't be totally sure that I'm not an NPC in some massively advanced computer simulation, and that everything that I experience as the world and universe around me isn't really just a long string of ones and zeros, and just an incredibly intricate computer program that I only think that I'm touching and experiencing. Same with the idea of logic being part of that program. However, I'm not a solipsist, so that's why I am conceding on those first 2 points. All of the evidence that I have access to is that the universe around me is real and that the laws of logic function consistently. However, a big hell to the no on that third one. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. There is no such thing as objective morality. Now, normally when this topic is brought up, I tend to quibble about the meaning of the word morality and what it means for something to be objective, and then explain how those two things are mutually exclusive. That it's actually impossible for morals to be objective. But I've sang that song and dance too many times before, and I want to instead focus on a different part of what you said that was wrong. You said that most people, both believers and skeptics, can agree on those 3 things. Well, sorry, Charlie, but you've got it wrong there. In 2 national surveys conducted by Barna Research, one among adults and one among teenagers, people were asked if they believe that there are moral absolutes that are unchanging, or that moral truth is relative to the circumstances. By a 3-to-1 margin, 64% versus 22%, adults said truth is always relative to the person and their situation. The perspective was even more lopsided among teenagers, 83% of whom said moral truth depends on the circumstances, and only 6% of whom said moral truth is absolute. The gap between teen and adult views was not surprising, however, when the adult views are considered by generation. While 6 out of 10 people 36 and older embraced moral relativism, 75% of adults 18 to 35 did so. Thus, it appears that relativism is gaining ground, largely because relativism appears to have taken root with the generation that preceded today's teens. The reality of the situation is that you are the one who have the minority view on this subject. Most people do not agree that there are some objective moral values. Because there aren't. There is not one single moral value that has been universally agreed upon as true by every culture, every society, every demographic, all across all of time and human civilization. Not one. Now, I imagine that since you're about to base your argument on these 3 axioms, the fact that I just rejected one of them is going to lead us into problems as we go. But that's your problem. Morality is relative, and it always has been.
Too bad, so sad, bye-bye.
Atheistic naturalism claims that these things emerge from matter, energy, and time.
Well, you just snuck from blanket atheism to now atheistic naturalism. Well, in case you didn't know, not all atheists are naturalists. But this is indicative of what I was talking about earlier. How atheism has no unifying belief system. So, true to form, you pick out one branch of philosophy that is atheistic and insist that you are now casting a net over all of atheists. No, not all atheists believe in only the natural world and nothing else. Atheists can believe in magic. Atheists can believe in spirits. Atheists can believe in universe-belching unicorns from the 8th dimension. Just as long as they don't believe in any gods. But you're in luck, because I happen to be a methodological naturalist. And though not all atheists are, we can go ahead and move forward with your argument.
But can these things explain this framework consistently? Well, let's look into that. The problem of logic. If naturalism is true, then human thoughts, including this video, are ultimately the product of blind, non-rational chemical processes.
I don't know what you mean by blind and non-rational. I mean, unless you're faking it rather well, you're not blind, right? And you made this video. So this video was not the product of blind processes. I suppose by blind you mean unguided? Like the processes themselves aren't thinking about carrying out the processes that they are? I guess this is the apologist's claim that without God as a supernatural grounding for the entire universe, then everything is just random chaos, and there's no reason why anything should be the way that it is, or no reason why everything doesn't just spontaneously change at any given time. Why, without God, your dinner could just randomly turn into an ugly beast that sings show tunes. Well, no. As a naturalist, I do not think that everything, including human thought, is the result of blind, non-rational chemical processes. I think the chemical processes that are responsible for our human thought are the result of consistent organic chemistry and neurology, which are rational processes that happen in a very specific way because of the consistent nature of the universe, and consistent ways that the elements that make up our brains function. I think that everything in the universe conforms to the natural forces and interactions that affect them. And so, when an apple is dropped, it isn't blind, non-rational random chance that it will fall to the ground. It's entirely in keeping with the gravitational influence that is pulling on it, the atmospheric conditions of the air that it's moving through, the composition of the apple itself and of the ground that ultimately stops its movement, and many other equally knowable and consistent factors that result in everything that happens to that apple when it's dropped. The same is true for everything else in the universe, from the tiniest photon moving through the vacuum of space to the largest black hole sucking in everything within its influence, from the simplest single-celled organism to the most complex biological life form. Nothing is blind, random, or non-rational. Everything that is and everything that happens can be rationally determined by the forces and the physical reality at play. The universe does not need a supernatural grounding to be the way that it is.
But here's the issue. If our reasoning is caused entirely by unguided physical forces, then why trust any conclusion it produces, including the belief in naturalism itself?
Because it has proven to be accurate. A natural physical force causes all objects with mass to fall to Earth at 9.8 meters per second squared. For as long as we've been measuring the rate at which things fall, everything has always fallen to Earth at 9.8 meters per second squared at sea level. Why trust that things will continue to fall at a rate of 9.8 meters per second squared? Well, let me answer that by asking you this. If you put your hand on a glowing red stovetop once and it burns your hand, and then you put your other hand on that same glowing red stovetop and it burns your other hand, and then your nose starts to itch, but your two hands are too burnt to scratch it, are you going to rub your face against that same glowing red stovetop to stop the itch? And if not, why not? Is it because you think God is magically keeping that stove hot? But why would he be doing that? If he loves you so much, he wouldn't want you to get burned. Or would you not put your face on that stove because you've experienced it being hot? All the evidence is that it will continue to be hot until it's had time to sufficiently cool off. All of the evidence points to that stove being hot. You don't need to believe in a God to conclude that it will remain hot. All our evidence is that the universe works in consistent, reliable, predictable ways. We trust these conclusions because we have every reason to trust them, and absolutely no reason to distrust them. This silly apologetic notion that comes by way of the transcendental argument for God, by the way, is that without God, everything would just be chaotic randomness. Well, this is completely unfounded. It's based on the axiomatic assumption that the natural state of everything is chaos. That without God, the strawberry Twizzler that you're eating would randomly turn into a snake named Thaddeus with chronic halitosis at any given moment. But this notion of a natural chaotic state to the universe is based on absolutely nothing. There is no reason why a natural, unguided universe with no supernatural grounding force can't exist in a perpetual state of consistent reliability. I mean, thinking that there's even a possibility of the provably consistent laws of physics suddenly changing without warning or without reason, well, we've got a term for that.
That's crazy. Batshit crazy.
As atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel notes, evolutionary naturalism undermines reason.
1, I don't care. I don't set my positions on things by what one individual says, even if that individual is a professed atheist. There's plenty of atheists out there that I disagree with on a whole host of issues. Not only do atheists have no consistent system of beliefs that we all must adhere to, we certainly don't have the equivalent of faith leaders who we have to pay any deference to. And then 2, Nagel has promoted the works and writings of intelligent design proponent and Discovery Institute dimwit Stephen Meyer. So I would take just about anything Nagel has to say with a grain of salt, particularly when it comes to intelligent design ideas, which he seems to regularly flirt with, despite being a professed atheist.
Now, some will counter this by saying evolution selects for truth, but evolution selects for survival, not necessarily truth. In fact, false beliefs can aid survival.
Who the hell ever said that evolution selects for truth? Oh, that's right. Make up shit that no one has said and that's laughably ridiculous, then ascribe that laughably ridiculous thing to your interlocutor to make them look silly. I forgot my religious apologetics playbook for a second. Yeah, no one says that, no one thinks that, stop making shit up and move on.
So, why would particles bouncing around in your brain track immaterial, universal truths like math or logic? You see, logic doesn't evolve, and it isn't physical.
Particles are not randomly bouncing around in my brain. As already explained, the brain behaves in predictable, consistent ways in keeping with organic chemistry and neurology. While no single logic center exists, logical reasoning involves a distributed network of brain regions all working together, primarily within the prefrontal cortex and parts of the parietal lobe. The prefrontal cortex is often considered the executive of the brain and is crucial for things like working memory, which is needed for holding and manipulating information actively in the mind, which is essential in order to follow logical steps. It helps with inhibition, which suppresses irrelevant information or impulsive responses that might interfere with logical thought, like overcoming the gut feelings when a logical solution is required. The prefrontal cortex helps with planning and goal-directed behavior, structuring thoughts and actions in order to reach a logical conclusion. Also, it directs fluid intelligence, the ability to solve novel problems and reason without relying on prior knowledge. The prefrontal lobe, in particular, has been identified as vital for logical thinking and problem solving. Then there's the parietal lobe. This region is involved in things like spatial reasoning, understanding relationships between objects and concepts, which can be extended to abstract logical relationships. The parietal lobe also helps with numerical processing. Basic arithmetic and quantitative reasoning contribute to logical operations, as well as our understanding of math. Also, our neuroprocessing uses interactions of systems. Our brain often employs two systems for decision-making and information processing. There's the reflective system, which is a logical, analytical, deliberate, and methodical system heavily involving the prefrontal cortex. Then there's the reactive system. This is quick, impulsive, and intuitive, relying on emotions and habits. While logic primarily uses the reflective system, there is an interplay between the two, and strong emotions can sometimes override logical processing. Our brains are complex organs that are a hell of a lot more involved than just random particles bouncing around in our heads. Stop being so reductive.
So, the conclusion: logic is best grounded in a rational, immaterial mind, not blind matter.
No, not at all. Logic is not grounded in anything at all. Logic is not a self-existent thing. Logic is not something that existed prior to Homo sapiens' arrival on this planet that was waiting for us to discover it. Logic is a language. At its core, logic is the systematic study of correct reasoning. It requires thinking agents to do the systematic study, and it requires thinking agents to do the reasoning. Without those aspects, logic doesn't exist. To put it another way, logic is our way of explaining how the universe works. The universe just is what it is. It's just doing what's in its nature to do. Gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear force, these are just the brute facts of the universe. Then, 13.8 billion years into it, humans came along and saw the consistently predictable ways that the universe worked, and we came up with logic to describe the consistently predictable ways that the universe worked. And so, if what you are really trying to say is that the way that the universe works needs to be grounded in an immaterial mind, well, there's two problems that you need to overcome before you can rationally assert that. One, you need to prove that it's even possible for a mind to exist absent of a brain to produce and contain it, because there's absolutely no evidence that such a mind is even a possible thing, let alone likely. But then you have the second thing, which is going to be even harder to overcome. This immaterial mind that you believe in as a god, a cornerstone of your belief is that such a being itself is not grounded in anything. That it is just a brute fact of existence that needs no further explaining beyond that it is naturally rational and logical. But now you have to explain why the universe itself can't exist the way that it does as a brute fact of existence that needs no further explaining beyond that it is naturally rational and logical. And that is something that, if I may be so presumptuous, you absolutely cannot do.
And you've got nothing.
So that is our first problem, but there is another problem, and that's the problem of consciousness. Materialism claims that consciousness, your inner life, is nothing more than brain activity. But correlation is not explanation. Brain scans can show what happens when you feel love, but they don't explain why you feel it. Neuroscience maps the activity, but not the experience.
Yes, it does. No matter what you've heard, you don't love anything with all your heart. You love from the depths of your ventral tegmental area, your hypothalamus, your nucleus accumbens, and other vital areas of your brain. And we don't just have the ability to explain what areas of your brain are active when you're in love, but we certainly can explain what is experienced. We experience feel-good neurotransmitters, like dopamine, often called the feel-good or reward neurotransmitter. Dopamine is central to the brain's reward system. When we're falling in love, dopamine surges are triggered by the presence of even just the thought of the loved one. This creates feelings of pleasure, motivation, craving, and intense focus, similar to the effects of addictive substances, which is why drugs can often release dopamine. It drives us to seek out and pursue the person we're attracted to, reinforcing the pleasurable experience of being with them. The ventral tegmental area, which I previously mentioned, is rich in dopamine and lights up significantly during this phase. There's also norepinephrine. This neurotransmitter is responsible for the physiological symptoms of intense attraction. It can cause increased heart rate, sweaty palms, flushed cheeks, heightened energy, and a reduced need for sleep and appetite. It contributes to that feeling of the butterflies in the stomach feeling, and the general arousal associated with being in love. Let's also not forget about serotonin. And interestingly, serotonin levels tend to decrease in the early stages of romantic love. And low serotonin levels are often associated with obsessive-compulsive disorder, which might explain the intrusive, all-consuming thoughts and preoccupations with the loved one during infatuation. It's like the brain is stuck on the object of their affection. In addition to these neurotransmitters, there's also bonding hormones. As infatuation mellows, different chemicals become more prominent. Maybe the most important hormone involved in love is oxytocin. Often dubbed the love hormone or cuddle hormone, oxytocin is crucial for social bonding, attachment, and trust. It's released during physical touch or physical intimacy, childbirth, breastfeeding. Oxytocin produces feelings of contentment, calmness, and security, strengthens the emotional bond between partners. The more intimacy and skin-to-skin contact, the more oxytocin is released, deepening these feelings of attachment. There's a lot more to the feeling of love too, but it seems rather easy to explain what the experience of love is like beyond just what areas of the brain light up during brain scans. We know everything that happens during not just love, but any of the wide array of human emotions, and we can replicate them chemically. MDMA, more commonly known as the drug ecstasy or Molly, can replicate much of what's experienced during someone being in love. That's because it is known to release a flood of serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. This idea that love is some kind of ethereal, unquantifiable, magical thing is just fanciful hogwash. It's all brain chemistry. And I don't say that like it's a meaningless thing. Given that everything that we are, our identity, personality, memories, thoughts, feelings, etc., are all processes from our brains, something like love that drastically impacts so much of our brains means that it is a massively impactful experience. But it's not a magical one.
Now, some say consciousness emerges from complexity, but that's like saying wetness emerges from dry atoms. It names the result without explaining it. Now, the implication is this: if naturalism were true, then your conscious experience of this very video would be inexplicable. Yet here you are.
It kind of seems like you're trying to make just a different version of the transcendental argument, which was your first point. But instead of, why does the universe behave the way it does if there's no God, you're now switching it to, why do you experience your emotions the way you do if there's no God? Well, it's the same refutation as I said before. The universe is predictably consistent, and apples fall towards the earth the same way every time. Similarly, our neurochemistry is consistent, and the feelings generated by the hormones released while in love affect people the same way every time. I mean, what's your next argument going to be? Why does fire burn you when you stick your hand in it instead of freezing you if there's no God? Or, if there's no God, how come you get injured when you get hit by a car instead of the car fusing with your body and turning you into Carman? Man, half car, all hero. Look, consciousness is not a problem for atheism. Consciousness is an emergent property of the brain, resulting from the communication of information across all of its regions, and cannot be reduced to something residing in specific areas that controls for qualities like attention, hearing, or memory. What we call consciousness is the interaction of all the different sections of our brain. Our memory, our emotions, our sensory data processing, our problem solving, our basic mood at any given time, and many, many more things. But all of them collectively is what we think of as our consciousness. The idea that it's not something based in our neurology simply because you think there needs to be some supernatural reason why the release of oxytocin is experienced as a pleasurable, happy occurrence, well, that's
crazy. Batshit crazy.
Now, if that problem wasn't enough, let's talk about the problem of morality, which I am sure many of you have already heard of.
Here we go. I said it towards the start, the morality issue was going to cause us problems. All right, let's do it, buddy.
Does it get tiring being wrong all the time?
People of all beliefs condemn evil and fight for justice. But under pure naturalism, morality becomes a byproduct of evolution or personal preference. It has no binding authority beyond, I feel this is wrong, or I think this is wrong.
Morality is a byproduct of evolution. It's an outgrowth of our evolved capacity of empathy. Our inclination for working together emerged in the child-rearing practices of our ape ancestors who lived a few million years ago. Sarah Blaffer Hardy, an anthropologist and evolutionary psychologist, states that this kind of human cooperation, the shared child care of these apes, was the turning point that led to us as emotionally modern human beings capable of mutual recognition and understanding. We are a pro-social species, and this is why we developed our ideas of morality, in order to foster greater cooperation and social unity that allows us to thrive as a species. And no, it absolutely has no binding authority beyond what we feel is wrong. And that's precisely why conceptions of morality change throughout time and cultures. This is why cutting off people's hands for theft is still practiced in near a dozen different countries to this day, even though organizations like the UN Human Rights Office and Amnesty International consistently call for the abolition of this practice as a cruel and torturous one. This is why just a couple hundred years ago, European colonialists had no problem, either legally or philosophically, with killing any member of indigenous tribes and doing significantly worse to the women of those tribes because they barely considered them as human beings at all. This is why your own holy book condones and even advocates for things like slavery, female subjugation, child sacrifice, and genocide. All things that are considered abhorrently immoral today, even by practitioners of the very religion that condones such acts. You know, people like yourself.
You know. Morons.
So that was Apologetics Unchained in his attempt to debunk atheism with a lot of stuff and nonsense that he claimed was logic. Let me be clear. There is no logic whatsoever in the transcendental argument, which was all that 2 of his 3 points amounted to. The idea that the universe should be random chaos if there is no God, which is an unproven assertion based on, near as I can tell, absolutely nothing. Just an insistence that chaotic randomness is the default state of the universe. But if you ask a transcendentalist, better known as a presuppositionalist, to give any proof that the default state of the universe is random chaos, they'll just say that they can't. Because the universe behaves in consistently predictable ways, and it only does that because there is a God. So, since there is a God in their mind, they can't prove that there needs to be a God for the universe to function. So instead, they just assume it, based on absolutely nothing. Well, I do not accept that the default state of the universe is random chaos. Instead, it seems to me that the default state of the universe is predictable consistency. And if that is the case, then there doesn't need to be any kind of supernatural grounding for the universe to behave the way that it does. Then, when it comes to consciousness, it's effectively the same argument. Why does your brain work the way it does and not some other randomly chaotic way if there's no God? Well, same refutation. If the universe's default state is consistency, then the organic neurochemistry of our brain would also behave consistently. And we would experience consciousness as an emergent property of our brains behaving the way that brains evolved to behave. And then his third point was based on the preassumption that universal moral conceptions exist when they absolutely do not. And to put it simply, as cut and dry as possible, if there is no consistent moral law, which there isn't, then there's no reason to think that there's a moral lawgiver. Then, of course, there were a host of other nonsensical things that he tried to sneak in there. Insistence that his reasoning pointed to an immaterial mind, when such a thing is impossible without a material brain to produce and contain it. Leaned on quote mining random atheist philosophers as if we should alter our entire conception of these arguments because someone ostensibly is on our side and seems to have said one sentence that was in tacit agreement with his position. And the blanket assuming of all atheists as naturalists from the outset, instead of acknowledging the diverse range of beliefs that non-theists can fall under. All in all, this had all the markings of someone who was fumbling for a way to turn the questioning around on his interrogators when he came to the realization that he couldn't adequately defend his own philosophical position. so better to attack the other side's position instead. And if they don't seem to have a consistent position to attack, just make one up, then misunderstand it, strawman it, and insist that it's disproven by the wild assumptions and unproven axioms that your own faith is built on. Well, that kind of thinking is, again,
that's crazy. Batshit crazy.
And so that is where we'll end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Check me out on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Patreon if you'd like to support my work directly. My Teespring if you want some Plinky merchandise. All that link below in the description. Special shout out to my most recent super thankers here on YouTube, Salvi Mike and Autumnal Fling. And with that said, until next time, I'm Professor Plink reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.